reality is Kyle McCord has had a really good start, in my opinion. But there's no way you could possibly say that any of the 3 games, prior to this would measure up to a win over the Irish. I mean, this is clearly test number 1, big test number 1 for Kyle McCord. And I think he's ready for it. I think he's going to play really well. Let's get into the Notre Dame defensive, personnel. Why don't we start on the defensive line? Obviously, Ohio State's offensive line is going to have its hands full.
Yeah, I think we starting on the defensive line. Inside at defensive tackle, they're going to be led by Riley Mills, 6'5", 306 pounds, just a rock inside. Really tough to move. He's a senior, been around the block a couple times. And then his counterpart is Howard Cross III, 6', 288, so a little bit smaller, but he's a junior on the field. He's been around a lot. He's a grad junior. So I don't know. His eligibility as a junior, he's been in college for 6 years. It's that same conversation we've had. And then a familiar face, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, that defensive end, former Buckeye there. So you've got to be thinking like, hey, he's probably trying to turn one up a little bit here this weekend. And then he's backed up by Kana Aswando Mansa. I probably messed that one up. But both those guys pretty much the same, 6'3", 6'4", 260, and both seniors. So I think that Notre Dame's defensive front is pretty solid, I would say. I don't think it's at the level. I think Ohio State's defense, if you were to compare them apples to apples, they're in a class above Notre Dame. So think of everybody on Ohio State being one tier up from everyone at Notre Dame, in my opinion, and especially starting on that defensive line, which is a very positive thing if you're Ohio State when we've seen what Ohio State wants to be, kind of maybe a run first and then throw second kind of an offense.
Yeah, but whether or not Ohio State has a slightly better personnel group on defense than Notre Dame does, this is still far and away Ohio State's best test against a good defense. And I am more concerned about what is Ohio State's offensive line going to do against this group, because, Josh Simmons is under the magnifying glass for me. He's played okay. I just wouldn't call it good. I don't think I would call it good enough. Donovan Jackson's been fine. Hasn't been great. Carson Hinsman, I think, has played pretty well as a center. Josh Fryer's had probably the best moments of anybody on that line so far at right tackle, but he's also had a few boneheaded moments. And I think Matt Jones has been okay at right guard. The offensive line, I guess, in the words of Donovan Jackson yesterday, they're just trying to stack days. When the players met with the media last night, Donovan Jackson basically just said they're just trying to literally one day at a time, one rep at a time, just try to keep on stacking some things and keep getting better.
And they need to, because we heard what Coach said after last week. Like you could tell last week he was very the urgency was up. You and I have talked about it a couple times, but there was a point of emphasis to get the O-line to start playing better because they need to. Because it will be, and I agree, there's a comment in there saying if the offensive line's not being talked about, that's a good thing. And I totally agree with that. Like if we're talking about the offensive line on Saturday nights or the next time we talk on Sunday, like that's a problem, because that means Notre Dame dominate up front. And everything that we've talked about and been seeing, like, those things, linger, and become a big problem against a really good team. So I couldn't agree more with you that the offensive line is where I'll be focused when Ohio State's on offense.
All right. How about the Irish linebackers?
Yeah. From the linebacking core, this is where I think Notre Dame's going to try to make some stuff happen. We talked earlier in the week about Maris Lufau. Like, this guy can fly. If he flies around, you'll be able to see him, right? He's going to be the Troy Polamalu guy. Big hair. They use him in a bunch of different places, right? They'll put him in that second level that your traditional linebacker, where he sits 3 yards behind the defensive line and makes plays from there. They'll also walk him up in different places. They'll walk him up on the ends. They'll walk him up on the middle. But he's kind of their moving piece, and he'll kind of be around. You'll see him kind of all over the field there. And then Tommy Eichenberg is number 27, J.D. Bertrand, 6'1", 233-pounder, and he's also a grad senior too. So he's going to be your veteran guy. Again, I think he's very similar to Tommy. I think they're a carbon copy of each other. They're not huge hitters. but they're smart as heck. They're in the right spot at every time, every play. They're going to make sure the entire team's lined up correctly, and everyone's in the right spots, and then they're just going to make plays. So I think he's going to be a guy to look out for. And then they have kind of these like floater guys. One's going to be Jack Kaiser. He wears number 24, 6'1", 230. He's also a senior. He's been around the block a couple times. And then number 12, Jordan Botchlow, 6'2", 220 pounder. They kind of float around. So they have these like outside linebacker types where they can be on the line of scrimmage and kind of be in coverage too. So I think that the second level of Notre Dame's defense is where some stuff's going to happen. And yeah, good question there. JD was out last week. Good question in the comments. It's looking like he is recovering. It was a concussion. So from what we've seen, what we know here, it looks like he's trending to play. So just kind of expect that. And if he doesn't play, his backup is Drake Bowen, a freshman. So that's certainly a different story there if JD doesn't go this week. But all signs are pointing towards him going.
I know we kind of got into the secondary a little bit the other day, but I don't think we necessarily went over, personnel in particular. It was more macro level talk. What do you think about the secondary?
Yeah, starting at corner, Cam Hart. He's kind of been a guy that kind of reminds me of Denzel Burke, right? You haven't really heard from him much, hasn't given up much, and he's seen a lot of football. 6'2", 200 pounder, and he's a senior, a 6-year senior. So he's seen some football. He's made some plays for Notre Dame. And then the guy that's been a very pleasant surprise is number 20, Benjamin Morrison. He's had a couple interceptions. He was a freshman All-American last year, so he is a sophomore. And he's certainly made some plays for Notre Dame early on. You would see him in that NC State tape. He appears a lot. So these guys, on the outside from the corner position, I think that, I wasn't early on in the week. I wasn't like too worried about them, and I'm still not now. I think Ohio State's team and Ohio State's receivers are so good that it won't matter. But these guys aren't bums, right? These are some solid players, and they're going to be, kind of in the right position at all times. So from on the outside, those are the guys that you're kind of going to be worried about and going to be looking at when Ohio State's, kind of throwing the ball throughout the air.
So I'll ask you the same question about their defense that I did the offense. When that defense is at its best, what does that look like?
Yeah, they're able to stop the run and being able to keep the obvious throwing situations, making sure that they're obvious. I think that where Ohio State's going to have a huge advantage is when they're able to just drop back and let it rip. And that's where I think Ohio State's going to be. If they're winning this game, that's because, they're getting Notre Dame in man-to-man coverage because they're able to run the football, and Notre Dame's having to account for an extra guy in the run game. Because Marvin Harrison, if that's ever the case, is going to have a massive day because nobody on this team is going to be able to guard him. Emeka Egbuka as well. I think those two guys are in a class of their own. And if Ohio State can really control the tempo of the game, they can control when those guys are going to be able to take shots. So when Notre Dame's at their best, they're going to be able to stop the run with their front four and their front six-ish with the linebacking core, and then let the guys in the secondary just be secondary guys because big plays are going to happen. I think Ohio State's going to be able to move the ball. And you get really a sense of when you watch Notre Dame's defense play, you get this sense of bend, don't break is kind of their attitude. They're going to give up throws. They'll give up yards. But when, push comes to shove and you get into the red area, like they kind of buckle down and try to force field goals. So that's kind of the sense I get when watching them play. Like, hey, they're okay with giving up yards, but just don't give up 7. If Notre Dame's playing good, they're stopping the run and allowing 5 guys in coverage to defend against, Ohio State's passing attack.
It's going to be fun to see how Ohio State tries to break them down because it should be a good test. I think the tight ends are going to be really involved in this game. I'm really looking forward to watching Cade Stover, and I think G. Scott's going to play a role. I don't know what personnel packages Ohio State will roll out there. wonder if we'll see a little bit of what we saw against Indiana in certain situations where they try to go really big. I don't know that for sure, but I wonder if Ohio State may try to employ a little bit of that. And if they do, I hope it works, because it'll be banging your head on a wall if it doesn't, right? Your best players are your wide receivers. So I prefer to see Ohio State spread it out. But I just have like a sneaking suspicion that Ohio State's going to try to showcase that it is as tough and physical as it is flashy on Saturday, if that makes sense. So I'm interested to see how Cade and G and if Joe Royer get in the game. Same deal.
And Brennan, that goes back to, how the team in the game was called against Indiana. Like, was that something that they almost use as, like, not a practice? You never want to say that a game's used as a practice, but like just trying to use a lot of that I formation stuff, because are they going to try to employ some of that this week? You just never know. I agree with you. I think that the tight ends will play a big role, but they got to just use them in the right spots. Making sure when you're throwing, you're doing that off of play action to get them in space. And then when you want to throw, we have our 4 best on the field, whoever that may be. It's Cade, it's Marvin, it's Emeka, it's Julian, and just making sure that from a personnel perspective, like when you want to play, make sure your best guys are out there to do that. I'm excited about it though.